Are we live, Susan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. First, thank you to CCTV, the incredible staff who have really made it possible for us to come together at times when many of us actually have felt really quite alone. And so a special thank you always to CCTV. If you are joining me today, my name is Marjorie Decker. I am state representative from Cambridge, and this, I believe, is the 15th town hall that I have hosted since this pandemic began. The idea behind these town halls was to really find a way to bring us together, whether that is if you were joined us by Facebook, if you have joined us through if you're lucky like my mom who's out there, you get to watch this on TV and take a break from Zoom, or you're on Zoom with us today. The idea is to really bring us together, provide some really concrete information about where we are. This pandemic has hit all of us. I don't think there's a person alive in the world who is not suffering because of this pandemic. We also know that the suffering is literally just not equal to the depths of the suffering, whether you are experiencing housing security, you're overhoused, you're facing the possibility of having to choose between sleeping in your car or going into a shelter. 1 out of 8 neighbors right here in Cambridge, 1 out of 8 people is experiencing food insecurity. To be clear, 1 out of 8 of our neighbors is experiencing hunger in Cambridge right now, which is not acceptable. And this pandemic has really pulled a curtain back to show us where this social safety net that we thought we had, both as a city, as a state, and as a national country, it's clearly not strong. And for those who are on the front lines every day, who are risking their lives either by cleaning buildings, hospitals, packing grocery stores, everybody who's been seen and deemed as essential have also been hit hardest by this pandemic as they've had less opportunity to keep themselves safe. We've had over 11,000 people in Massachusetts who have died so far. This week, we saw one of the highest, on Wednesday, one of the highest rates of loss in our state, and that's over 80 people who've lost their lives. I just want to say to all of you who are watching this, we are almost there. There is a tunnel that we could not see several months ago. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And if we can do the best we can to really continue keeping our distance from one another, wearing our masks, washing our hands, but really staying to the degree that you can away from other people outside of your household bubble, that is how we're going to continue to make this safer for those who don't have those same choices. And for those of you in our community who have lost someone due to COVID or who have suffered through this virus, I just want to say that there's a lot of us in this community who are sending our love to you and who are here to be of support in any way. One of the ways that we can be supportive of each other is to connect and to have conversations. And I think the topic that we're facing today is particularly important. The issue of trauma and mental health is one that has always been sort of somehow separated from our own physical health. I've always said to people, like, you wouldn't ignore your need to go see an eye doctor or to go see a dentist if you had a toothache or if you had blurred vision. But continuing today, as we enter into 2021, there is still this stigma that somehow our mental health is separated from our own total health. And we have some amazing people here today who are going to talk about what that journey is like. I'm going to introduce our panelists who are here today. One of our young panelists here is only with us for a short time, so we're going to try to pivot to some of the questions to her very quickly. But I quickly would just like to do an introduction of who is here with us. So I will start with Sofia Klum. Sofia, since you have the shortest amount of time, we want to say thank you so much for joining us. But maybe if you could just give like a quick 30-second introduction of yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am Sofia Klum. I am a sophomore at CRLS. I actually just moved to Cambridge about a year and a half ago, so I'm pretty new to the area. Yeah, I would say it's been a very good year and a half. I'm very happy to be living here.
Welcome to the community, Sofia.
Thank you.
And I have also with us Maddie U. Phelps. Maddie, thank you for joining us today. If you could just say 30 seconds about who you are.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm a senior at CRLS. I've lived in Cambridge since I was 7 years old. And I love it a lot.
Great, thank you for joining us. Then the next couple also give me great joy introducing. There's my childhood friend, Keith Meskel, who, if you don't know him, boy, are you missing out on a lot of really good stuff. Keith is a writer, an actor, a producer, and also a mental health advocate, who we'll get into more of what Keith's done, but I just did a little introduction because I'm so proud of who Keith is in this world. But Keith, maybe you can give 30 more seconds of an introduction to yourself.
Yes, thank you so much, Senator Decker, for having us, and thank you also for CCTV. I have to acknowledge has always been the #1 public access network in the U.S. So I just have to say that. But my name is Keith Maskell. I'm from Cambridge. Like Senator Decker said, I'm an actor and producer, and also the co-founder of the Triggered Project. We are shattering the silence, nurturing the healing Black and brown male survivors with the use of art. So I've been, last couple of years, I've been telling my story as a survivor of abuse, and using my art to be able to help others and to be able to generate the conversation that folks in general, but people in the Black and brown community don't want to have, and that's about Black men and being sexually abused. And so I'm very excited to be here. The other thing as well is I'm an educator, working with the Huntington Theater Company right now with the August Wilson monologue competition, and using those words and monologues to help kids gain confidence, learn about Wilson, but also to deal with their trauma in some ways. So I'll be talking a little bit more about some tools that we can use with children as we're home to help us all have some fun and some more connection.
Thank you, Keith. I feel like I could spend an hour just continuing to introduce you, but we'll get to that as we go through this. And by no coincidence, his amazing partner in life, who's also a clinician who joins us as both a licensed social worker, a psychotherapist, and someone who works, I think we're not supposed to say because you're not representing the facility, but who works at Boston Medical Center and also works with college students in the area at a local college. I'll leave that to you if you want to share that, but who has extraordinary experience. Roxanne, would you just spend 30 seconds also introducing yourself additionally?
Sure, I'm Roxanne Maskell, and I'm also a lead clinician for the Trigger Project, and trying to ensure that Black and brown men who have these experiences feel welcome to the therapy world or therapeutic spaces. That's not something that we have seen a lot of focus on, and it's an important thing because I think personally it's an underserved population. And so in the midst of all of that, also working in a hospital environment during this pandemic has been, let's just say, interesting, if nothing else. There's a lot more adjectives that I can use, but I'll just leave it at interesting for now. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So we usually do an hour long, but we're going to do 90 minutes because I think there's a lot of areas to cover here. And I'm going to just jump right in because I want to be able to really take advantage of Sofia's time with us. Sophia, as a young person who's, I mean, when you say that you've lived here for a year and a half, my heart just kind of like, was sending you a little bit of a hug here, right? You've had less than a year to get to know your new community, your peer group at the high school, and now you've been doing all of this remotely. Do you maybe want to share a little bit more about, what was about this topic that you actually wanted to take part in, like what inspired you to want to be part of this conversation? And if you could share with us maybe some of the things that you think your peers are really struggling with in the middle of a pandemic and remote learning.
Yes, of course. So, well, as you said, yeah, I moved here a year and a half ago. I didn't even get the full year to get to know people and the community to the fullest. I think one reason that I think everybody should be really intrigued and invested in learning in about mental health and caring about mental health, especially in youth and younger people who might not really know so much about it or just ignore it. my friends over quarantine and before, it's been a mess. There's been a lot of, I would say, like difficulties and unexpected situations that had to be handled. And during a pandemic, it's just there's so much going on that a lot of people need to be part of that, and a lot of time a lot of people are not a part of that, which is a severe problem. So the more people the better. Definitely checking in on your friends and talking to people about mental health. Yeah, I would just love to spread awareness and give my feedback.
So, Sophia, I'll ask you and I'll ask Maddie to jump in. Do you think, has it been easy for your peers to really connect, just one, to connect? And do you think that your peers are feeling comfortable talking about sort of, what are the struggles involved in living through a pandemic? You're young adults at this point, right? So whereas I think for kids who are younger, we've been trying to, for some of us, protect them a little bit from how scary this is, but you guys are seeing all of this for what it is. And seeing the failures of adults who are in charge of making decisions to protect the whole country, and also trying to understand how do you connect with each other and support each other? Is that something that you think your peers are open to, and what are some of the things concretely that you think are working for either you or your peer group?
So there has some things that have worked with connecting with my peers and everybody around me, really, my family, my classmates. I think people try to avoid this a lot, but honestly, just asking straight up, really being very direct with people, because a lot of times it's easy to avoid speaking about your mental health, and it's really that option to other people. So yeah, I've found that asking in sugar-coated ways, or just acting not as worried as I am about them, it's really not worked, and asking straight up has. I think in a lot of cases I haven't applied that logic to a lot of my peers and a lot of my relationships with people, and it has gone downhill when I know that I should have been more direct and been closer to them when they needed it.
Thank you. Maddie, have you found that this has been something that's been left up to sort of your peer group to try to figure out and how to support each other? Or have there been, systems in place through the schools or various teachers to actually try to build that kind of conversation and support?
I mean, I think there's definitely been talk about adults helping students and supporting them. And I know like CRLS got 2 new social workers, and that they've been opening up lunch times to meet with like students of different grade levels. I personally have not gone to those because I'm always busy during lunch. But I do appreciate that being an option. Outside of that though, I would say it's pretty much left up to each individual student. I know that like as far as like my friends go, it's kind of like it depends on how like severe the situation is, whether it's talked about or not. I think if it's tiny things that they feel like, oh, everyone's probably feeling this, so I shouldn't say something, or I'm the only one feeling this, so no one's going to understand. Like when it's kind of like just figured out in someone's head rather than actually talked out loud, I think that's when things tend to start to de-escalate. But in terms of just talking about mental health in general, I mean, I'm very open with my friends about my mental health. So I think in that sense, having someone who's, and I'm not saying like everyone has to talk about their mental health 24/7, but just as someone who is pretty open about their mental health with their friends, I think that sometimes opens the doorway to my friends hopefully feeling comfortable to express their feelings, whether that's to me or somebody else, just by having it kind of like more normalized rather than just being like a, oh, so this thing happened today and I'm feeling stressed about it, but I don't know what to do. Like it's more like instead of letting it build up, it's kind of like a little support group, unofficial support group. um, but just a place where people can talk about whatever they're feeling and just know that all their feelings are valid and like even if they're like, oh, nobody else feels this way, and even if nobody else does feel that way in that exact moment, like those feelings are valid. Yeah.
I think that's helpful, Maddie. I think, learning one, I think what's complicated right now is that the adults who've been in charge of figuring out how do we continue to provide some sense of normalcy for young people in school right now have been focused on how do we make sure that education doesn't stop right in the middle of the pandemic. And there's been a lot of focus on making sure that, students can get to classes, whether that is first grade, fourth grade, 8th grade or 11th grade, right? Throughout the whole gambit here is that there's been a lot of focus on trying to figure out how do we deliver education to students and how do we do it safely. And one of the things that I've been concerned throughout this pandemic is that we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to help you do remote learning for the most part, because most students throughout the state are doing remote learning because of our inability to really think about how to safely pivot in this pandemic. And some have done it better than others, but I will go back to say that I think there's been a complete failure on the state to provide a better roadmap to do that. And that where we are falling short is actually thinking about ways in which that are intuitive for young people to be able to have a space to talk, right? Hard to focus on learning if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, if you're, if you're worried about your friends. And I'm going to throw out some statistics to Roxanne and to Keith. And I'd love to sort of hear your thoughts in terms of any trends that you're seeing and, just your feedback. And I know that Sofia, I think you have maybe about 12 more minutes with us. So I want to make sure we get you in here one more time. But when I tell you, Roxanne, this may not surprise you, right? There's been a 300% increase of emergency room visits from families whose adolescents are having an emergency psychiatric moment. 300% increase through the pandemic. And then I say that the Gaston Institute, which is located at UMass Boston, has surveyed that among Spanish-speaking families in Massachusetts, they've identified, families have identified 43% of them that they've seen a severe decline in the mental health of their children. And then I throw out the other statistic here that says that for children of color, for the ages of 10 to 19, at this moment, suicide has become the second leading cause of death in that group. This is for me where we've spent a lot of time, and there's no finger blaming except for, I will say, the state. We have failed as the state. That we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to deliver education, and we've not spent enough time, in fact, thinking about how do we deal with the impact and the trauma of what's happened in upending everyone's lives, but upending the lives of young people who are now having to deal with the isolation and the anxiety, and which all of this is causing: the pandemic, the remote learning, the being away from friends. So I throw that over to you.
Woo, those are some numbers you have, right? And I think one of the things that I was thinking about when I was listening to Maddie was that
We just lost you for a second, Roxanne. We can't hear you. Your screen is frozen. All right, so we're there you are, Roxanne. We lost you. Now you're back.
So one of the things I was thinking about when I was listening to Maddie and listening to what you're saying about the numbers is that we know how to do a job. We know how to show up to do a job. The place where we fail is how do we build community for these young people? And we needed to do that prior to the pandemic. And things like what Keith is going to talk about, bringing the arts to these spaces, not only to give a voice to young people, but to help them express themselves. Those are two different things. Giving voice and expression are very different. And when we create expectations, structure, predictability, and if our systems were already focused in that way, then maybe our young people wouldn't be suffering the transitions in the same impactful way or manner. Because we would have already had a foundation of community and building. And when I hear 2 social workers at the high school, that's fantastic. But how many students are at the high school? When you start looking at it from that perspective, what exactly are we doing? We're putting a Band-Aid on. And we have to pay attention to that's what we're doing. Where's the community and all that? Because the adults are struggling just as much as our young people.
That's right.
And we have to be real about that.
Yeah, I think, well said, Roxanne, and I think, we talked about creating space, right? And creating space for young people is important. But we also have to start with creating the space for ourselves, right? That's the most difficult thing. When I'm working with the kids from CRLS for the August Wilson monologue competition, right? And I ask them, how are you doing, right? How do you feel when people ask you that, or teachers ask you? And they say, I feel like a lot of people ask, but they really don't want to know, right? They ask and move on. One thing that we're doing is I'm creating space for that, right? I am having them write about, as they're learning August Wilson, I'm creating a space for them to write about this experience. So one of the first questions is what is it like to live this Zoom life? And you can use 2 swears. But creating that space for them to have those feelings and be real about them and have them validated goes a long way, right? Because we're all going through the same thing together, but we're all trying to keep it together as well, right? So the adults are trying to keep it together and not show that they be having a hard time. And then, the kids are doing the same thing, but I think it's important that that we create space for ourselves, but create space in the curriculum or in the teaching day for kids to really be able to talk. And that's where art comes in, right? The fact that the kids are able to write about how they feel and express themselves, whether it is a monologue, whether they're writing rhymes, whether they're painting, whatever it is, we have to find ways that there's an outlet. Art is such an outlet, and we have to encourage that to validate the feelings. But we have to give ourselves permission as well to be able to show sometimes that we're not okay, right? To be vulnerable, right? And that is often tough for us as educators and as adults because we're not sure once we start opening up a little bit what else is going to come with it and can we keep it together.
Well, I think that's one of the issues is that adults don't believe they have the answers, or they believe they have to have an answer when a young person asks them something. Right. And they don't. Right. What they need to be is show vulnerability so that their kids understand that we are all vulnerable. We are all suffering a loss and grieving right now, but we are still together. Yes. And so when you show as a parent your kids that it's okay to be vulnerable, then what you're really doing is building a different kind of relationship where it's not so scary. And that the young people that I talk to, they think that if they start telling me what's really going on in their minds or their feelings, they think that they're never going to find their way back. Right. And I'm like, back to where? Because you are where you are right now, and what's happening right now is not really effective for you. Right. So what do you want to do? Because as a therapist, even through Zoom, and Keith has the same magic, they can feel us. They know that we're listening. I'm poking around inside. I'm probing. Sometimes I just say it. You feel me poking around, don't you? You feel that? That's me. That's my finger. And you see exactly what Sofia and Maddie and you did, Marjorie, smile, right? What I built right there was connection. That's right. You feel me, I feel you. That means I see you. You see me. That's right. And there's nothing more valuable than being able to help people understand that you see them,
Right.
even their pain.
Right.
You know, Sophia, I'm going back to what you mentioned earlier about having to be more straightforward about like really, you know, asking your friends where they're at if it's not coming out organically. Do you think that, you know, do you think that your peers feel like it's okay to not be okay? And do they, and are there enough, you know, what would be more helpful from, you know, both educators or adults in their lives and helping to just kind of be able to really have that kind of space to acknowledge that you're not okay or that it's hard?
So I have friends who tell me when they're not okay and who I believe think that it's okay to not be okay. I also have friends who really just keep it all to themselves. I recently had a friend who got into a very messy situation because of that. And so yeah, when I say that I think that it's better to say it more directly, you know, it's like what someone mentioned earlier about when people ask, how are you? But they don't really want to know the answer. They just are saying it to be nice. That can really have an effect on someone, because every time that you're just like fine, or you kind of just move along the conversation, you're repressing those feelings even more. And it's the most important thing probably for you in general to speak about how you're feeling and really let people know. So yeah, I would say my friends think that it's okay to not be okay, and I constantly am reminding them of that.
You know, Sophia and Maddie, I would ask you both, you know, there's this kind of one place of where like, you know, none of us are okay. You know, when people ask me how I am, I say, well, ask me at different hours of the day, because I'm okay at some parts of the day and I'm not okay in other parts of the day, right? It is a roller coaster, and I have 2 kids, and that's exactly what it's like for them. And I hope that I'm okay when they're not okay, but sometimes we're both not okay. And I guess one of the questions for, you know, your peers is that, is it obvious where to go to if you're not okay, you know, and is it obvious to your peers about at what level is it not okay to just do this alone, right? That these feelings that you're sitting, because we're all feeling really heavy at different times, but there's a time in which you actually need someone else to be there, and you may need a little bit more support. And do you feel that is coming into your lives? And some of you may have parents who are really good at doing this. And even with really great parents, people can still, you know, not get this kind of support. And I just think about your peer group and about what are we doing systemically to be able to check in and encourage these conversations, either in a peer setting, so it's peer to peer, but are we helping to create spaces, and are we making it obvious where to go in those moments? And I say we, meaning the city, the school department.
Well, I think like for sorry, I'm just trying to think real quick.
Okay. We got time.
In terms of is there like a place to go, or like when do you actually talk to somebody? I think it varies. I would say that while my friends and I are pretty open with each other about how we feel about certain things, there are certain things that we just don't talk about. I would say one main area that we do talk about, which is part of the reason I was interested in this, is art. And how it's really hard to access art right now, and like for us to participate in it, and how it's hard to find those spaces, and so I think like we talk a lot about different ways that like we can like collaborate with each other, which I think does help boost each other up. But at the same time, there is something about like being able to work with people who you've never met before, and being able to do something that isn't entirely like created by yourself. And what I mean by that is not that things that are created by like you are bad, but I think another struggle that I've noticed among my friends that has impacted their mental health is the struggle to be creative, and this feeling and need to somehow have all this free time, but it doesn't feel like free time, and having it be really hard to focus on the things that they love, which I think ties into mental health and how it affects that, if that makes sense. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think you're giving us a lot more than just the question, which is helpful. I want to pivot over to Keith, but before I do, Sophia, how are we doing with your time?
Good. I have about 10 minutes left.
Okay. You know, Keith, this is powerful, right? I think when you and I talked about this, I think there's two ways of thinking about art. And for me, I think about art in all of its forms. I don't think of myself as an artistic person, right? I think of it as something so separate from me. I also know that art is something that really ties us together, allows us to express moments where we are as a society, as a movement, and feelings, right? It evokes mood. So I know I have a relationship to art, even if I don't feel artistic. Can you talk about some of what Maddie just, expressed as like some of the struggles that her peers are experiencing around wanting, to feel more creative? Because we have all this time, right? I mean, there's so much I think I should be doing. I should be a good cook by now. So, and I know you've been doing some really amazing work with young people, and you have given some really concrete things to me over time about sort of how to use art as a parent in helping my own kids.
Right. No, thank you. And I think as a person who is, I was an actor for sure, but and just to share a little bit, I've been a little ill for the last 3.5 years, dealing with complications from shingles, and so I went from running around, promoting a movie, all kind of stuff, to absolutely stopping all the things that I would normally do. I just could not do before this pandemic. And I felt the same way that you're talking about how to create, how to be inspired, how to have connection with other folks. And I definitely went through a dark time, but then I started to think about it, and I was like, wow, I have to start thinking about how I create differently, right? I can't, my process that I normally had, I had to be okay with trying new things, right? Things that I hadn't even thought that I possibly could do. And that started to give me hope, right? But then I also realized as well, when you have a phone in your pocket, you have connection to the world, right? And that's what I would say. That's what I would say to to high school students or whatever. You can film. You can make whatever you want. You can actually. I would encourage folks to do that, to film, to document, and then through social media and whatever, then you start connecting that to other people. But as artists, sometimes we get in our head about it, right? And feeling like we can't create, right? And sometimes it's a block that we get, right? Because we get motivated and energized a lot of times by people and by that interaction. And so we feel lost when we don't have that. And we're not used to having to generate some of that for ourselves, right? It's not that we can't. It's a point that we haven't had to as much, and it just seems really hard. But if we're stuck in only one way of thinking about how to create, then it's only going to be one way. It's forced me to, and that's even how I started working on the Trigger Project and things like that. It started for me to create in a different way. I had to, start writing. I had to start editing and creating merch and things like that. And you know what I mean? I had to really seek out people to try to have some type of connection to help myself keep motivated, and then figure out also how to be myself over Zoom, right? Because most people talk on Zoom like this. No, I'm not like that. I'm animated on Zoom. Why? Because you have to give people energy so they can feed off you. When I'm working with students, I'm like this all day. Ha ha, let's go. And they look at me like, hey, yeah, great. There's interaction, right? That's different. I'm actually just responding to what I need for myself. And we're not used to doing that. So I empower folks. I empower the students that I'm working with that you can create whatever you want. We have to come out of this time better than we were. We have control over that, right? We have so much control. That's something that we can control, actually. You know, and how can we help others? And I think that's where I got my passion from with the project of mental health and things like that, because it wasn't necessarily about me as much. It was, but it wasn't. But how can I make a difference in the world? And so that's what I challenge the young folks. How can you use your art to change the world? How can you help other people through your art? How can you sharing your story affect someone else on a different part of the world to feel like their thoughts are validated, like they have a voice, right? COVID hasn't taken our voices from us. Only we can do that. We can silence ourselves. But there's so much technology in a small phone or an iPad that's a gateway to so many other things, right? But even in terms of, you know, parents and things like that, you know, like music is such a great thing. Impromptu dance parties are phenomenal. At some point, everybody's always trying to dance to Bruno Mars. I'm just saying. We could go boy band, we could do whatever, but like tense moments can be broken with music, most definitely. You know, and that's what I would say. I would encourage parents to do that. I would encourage them to do old school things like whip out a puzzle. I would do that. I would say things like a staring contest, which can work on Zoom. I could beat all of you right now in a staring contest. I know that. But those things are very concrete and simple. Thumb wrestling, like so silly and so stupid, but such a connection. You could do it social distancing too, if you wanted to, and use your imagination. Right? Exactly. You pinned me. Okay. But if you have someone, a sibling or your child or whatever, like these are the tools that we have, right? The more we open up ourselves to having fun with it and taking it old school, the more we'll have time to slow things down. Because that's the other thing that's difficult for some of the young folks. Everything's so fast. Now things have slowed down and they're not sure what to do because they always have an iPad or whatever to help with the mind. But it's important that we slow down. Meditation is important. Breathing together is also something that's really great to do with your kids and things like that, because that's a skill that takes practice. Right?
So Keith, I want to come back to you. And before we lose Sophia, I guess, Sophia, one of the questions I would have for you, if you could, say to your high school or to the leaders in your community, right? And you live in a community that really does listen to young people, just so you know. I was a student activist at CRLS, and I connected with the mayor there. And I will go ahead and put it out there. I thought the high school should be giving out condoms. Not every parent out there agrees with that, maybe. This was at the height of of HIV and AIDS. And so as a student activist, I worked for that. And it happened. And as a legislator, I just passed legislation a couple of years ago that allows us to remove a gun from someone's home if we think they're going to hurt themselves or hurt someone else. That was done because a young person came to me with that work, not because it was my idea. So you live in a community in which I think that there's a lot of adults who are in positions of decision-making and leadership who do care about what you have to say. And I'm getting some questions here from folks, even in your school, teachers saying, what would you have them do differently? How would you suggest, are there things that you think would help actually build community and build a more authentic sense of community, right? Outside of just what you're able to do yourself as an individual. But, are there things that if you could ask, your teachers, your educators, or the superintendent to do, as we're going to get through this winter. This is a really tough winter, but we're going to get through it. And when we get through it, life is going to be a little bit different. Still hard, but better and different. And so are there things, Sofia, that you would right now encourage the adults in this community to be thinking differently about?
So last year, actually, when I was a freshman, I was in a health class, and my health teacher, we were focusing on mental health, and he actually told us to go outside and make a playlist of an hour-long playlist and just walk and listen and think. And I would say I didn't expect it, but that was probably one of the most beneficial things for my mental health that I had done in a while. I think we lose ourselves sometimes with everything happening around us, and we're constantly worried about others. We forget about ourselves sometimes. And my health teacher, I think, was just trying to refocus us and remind us that we also have to take care of ourselves. I'm going to use the analogy of when you're on a plane and, the thing falls down and they're like, yourself before you help your children. We can get so caught up in other people's business, and which can be beneficial to them. We need to help others, but first, we always come first. We always need to take care of ourselves first, and we can find several ways to do that. Actually, I've been trying to write music recently, so that's really helped me because I find myself writing lyrics that I didn't even know. I felt that way. I didn't even know that I had those thoughts. It was clearing my mind so much. It really helped me. It gave me motivation, even just for a short period of time. And I really think that it's important that we get the word out there and that more people should start participating in these things. So, yeah.
So it sounds like you had a teacher in your life who really said to you it was important for you to pay attention to yourself, and that it was important to find some concrete ways to give you some space that would allow you to just kind of be with yourself and kind of give you that time to think and breathe, right? And that was through, her idea was to make a playlist. And it sounds like the more times that we as adults and as youth who are sharing those ideas with each other, there's people listening to you now, right? The more we have the chance to share those ideas, and the more opportunities that adults in your lives and our lives are able to provide those spaces. It sounds like that's a part of being helpful. And I think that the moment that we're in is that there's no one answer, right? And so when I think about Roxanne, I think about the work that you do. And one of the concerns that I've had, so I should have started out by, acknowledging I am the House Chair of the Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use, and Recovery. And one of the things that I'm really proud of that I wrote a children's mental health bill. It's for adolescent and children. And we finished it just a couple of weeks before the budget. I worked with the Children's Mental Health Campaign throughout the state. And we were able to get a piece of this budget into the budget, this bill, and it's going to create a new center at UMass Boston's Birch Institute, which focuses on behavioral health. And the idea is that we're going to bring, in a way that's never happened before, the Department of Education, as well as DMH, the Department of Mental Health, we're going to force them to come together and allow clinicians and nurses, school nurses and social workers, and it has a whole bunch of people who are now going to be forced to come together through this to talk about best practices and to talk about how to share resources, train educators and staff and schools, provide them resources, provide a hotline when they need it. Right now, people assume that if you're a pediatrician, your pediatrician knows everything you need to know about your child's mental health. Well, it's not true. There's a whole field of people who go to study advanced knowledge around mental health. But we do have a hotline for pediatricians. So they call this hotlines, called the MCPAP program. And they call it, and a pediatrician says, wow, I'm really struggling with, I think I have a patient who's really, struggling with anxiety or depression, and they get professional help. we don't provide that kind of direct support for educators in Massachusetts. And I'm really proud to say that I think I'm a part of something that's going to really change that and be transformational. But in the meantime, a lot of the sort of what we call in the biz, right, this upstreaming of services, which can mean anything from a teacher who notices that you just kind of maybe need to go make a playlist and breathe, sees that you're struggling, right? That's a touch. That's a touch that you may not even realize is somebody recognizing you need some more support and giving ideas. And educators and staff do that all day long, every day. They do it in formal and informal ways. They do it in knowingly and unknowingly ways, right? And that's kind of how we continue to function as a society. A lot of that has been taken away from students through all grades. That has just been sucked away. And as you alluded to earlier, you have adults who are in their own feelings trying to figure out, how do I continue work? How do I be out of work? And how do I keep my family safe? And how do I keep myself safe physically and our mental health? What would you say, Roxanne, right now to parents and to young people who find themselves really struggling and don't know how to really speak to the needs of children in their lives right now who are struggling, who are facing depression or they think they are? What are some things right now that you think would be some additional kind of ways for people to just or parents to just even approach this in their home? And it's a range. It's different, right? It's different from where kids are in terms of what they're struggling with and what the ages are. But what would be some advice you have?
I think that when parents get together, they themselves, this is about understanding that everybody's bringing something to the table. It's not about, oh, let me go to a therapist and they're going to give me, right? That might be good for some, but everybody's bringing something to the table. And so building off of the strengths of what people have. There are parents that are using very different strategies to help their children as well as get their own help. Some parents might use the parent stress line. It might be like the high school creating sort of a parent forum where parents are together talking about how they're managing and sharing ideas. It doesn't have to always be professionals providing all of that. Mm-hmm. Professionals are very important in that mix. I will say that. But let's not forget, everybody has something to bring to the table. That's called strength-based perspective, as opposed to the deficit model. And so how do we build off of that? And things that might be really helpful for some of the high schoolers really is some of the models that we use in my counseling center. One is I have what we call community therapy drop-in hour. And that's where a student can just show up unannounced. I just need to talk to you for a couple minutes. I need to sort of think this through. For the students that I work with, I call it the I need, I want, right? It gets right to the point of what it is, and it's tangible. And that's something that you can do for parents. That's something that you can do for students across the board. It's all dependent on what resources do we have already. Is the parent stress line able to do something like that? That's a resource that we have available already. How are they working? Are they getting a lot of calls? Are they getting calls from parents? Can we tweak it a little bit? Can we ask them to do something different, right? Use what we have. The other thing that I'm using, which is very similar to what Sofia was talking about, because I can't provide therapy to students outside of Massachusetts, and a lot of the college students that I work with are outside of Massachusetts, we created a way to have discussion groups that are not therapy-based, but they're community-based. And so I'm actually doing a discussion group with, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the Girl Track Movement podcast. And so basically what happens is, for my group, because we meet once a week, they have to listen to the podcast, but they have to be walking while they're listening outside for 30 minutes. And so when you do the podcast in its entirety, it's 21 days in a row, walk every day. But because we're also doing a discussion group component, we come back and we talk about whoever was highlighted in that podcast. And most of the people that are being highlighted are surrounded around the injustices for Black and brown people that are dying and being killed. And so the reason why this speaks to my students, because I primarily reserve myself for Black and brown students, is because they don't have that space anywhere. I work at a predominantly white institution, and they don't feel like they belong. And so this creates that community and space. These are very creative ways. It's a way to use art. So when I hear Keith talking about his art, my art is figuring out how do I use the resources around me to be creative. It's not about just therapy.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, Roxanne, because I think for many parents and and educators coming straight at a young person, whether it's a child in their life or a student, right? How are you? Is everything okay, right? Well, the answers don't always reflect what's really happening. And it may not be that the student is not answering or the child's not answering honestly. It's that they don't have the words for how they're feeling, right? And so I love this idea that you talk. Is this podcast that you're using, is that something that anyone can access?
Yeah, it's girltrack.org. And the purpose of Girl Track is two Black women who were noticing the trends of how many Black women are dying, basically because of curable diseases like diabetes. Not curable, but like sort of manageable diseases. And so that's why they started this. And what they've been doing is recruiting Black women, brown women. They invite allies to come, and everybody walks together, and they get on the call because it's a live call. Now, I'm never able to get on the call because I'm working. But what I like about it is that they tape it, and you can listen to it in your own time. But it's a meditative talking podcast. And so you need to get out, right? And that's part of the health sort of perspective, the mental wellness perspective. Sure. Anybody can tap into that. I happened to come across it, and I ended up walking all summer long listening to it, losing weight, feeling great. And then there was something about these two women and their sharing and talking, and specifically talking about certain people. Some I knew, some I didn't, because it's called Black History Boot Camp is what the podcast is. And I was learning, and I was like, I have to find a way to use this because, quite frankly, it was helping my mental health. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't think about therapists need to do their own self-care mental health. Yeah. It is very hard to transition my therapy, my practice to home. That means I never get to separate from the pain and suffering that I hear all day long. So I have to do something in order to be okay.
Well, I love this idea that you're doing multiple things, right? And I wonder, Maddie, is there space in, whether it's through, the high school or, I could even see something where the youth centers, but can you imagine where, it was mandatory? And I'm just throwing this out there, right? That, every young person, because the podcast that Roxanne's talking about, I have to imagine there's several different kinds of podcasts that could be curated where the person listening feels very much aligned and like being spoken to. And I wonder, I can imagine like what it looks like. And somebody had asked about building community, about how to move forward and building more authentic community. Could you imagine a time in which the high school said, okay, we're going to reduce some classwork by 30 minutes. And in those 30 minutes, right, it's going to be required that you're going on one of 5 podcasts and you need to be moving, however, that's in your house. Like, I don't care if you're doing push-ups or you're walking outside, and then you get to come back for like, the next 15 minutes and you're discussing it in small groups. Is there anything like that that's happening now that is inviting young people into more of these conversations and ability to sort of have a tool to reflect on those feelings? And can you see something like that being useful?
Yeah, I think the most similar thing I can think of is in, I want to say, all the theater classes, but I'm not certain about this, but in all the theater classes I've taken at CRLS, we always do a check-in at the beginning, where we say something we're grateful for, and it's always something we're grateful for. It's never something you're upset about or something you're mad about, because I think one thing that humans in general just tend to do is think about what are the bad things that are happening to me right now, how can I fix them, and not necessarily, well, these are bad things that are happening, but also there's some good stuff that's happening. And so I think the closest thing to what you just proposed that I've experienced is that one, grateful at the beginning. Sometimes it's just one thing you're grateful for, sometimes it's a person you're grateful for, sometimes it's who's somebody in the class that you're grateful for. And so I mean, I kind of wish we did that in all my classes, to be honest. Because I think, especially through Zoom, a lot of the people who take the theater classes, I know them already through other theater at school. But that would be a way, like, even if it's just through the chat, because I know some people don't feel comfortable turning on their cameras. Like, even if it's just through the chat, I think that would definitely be a way, like a subtle move towards building community, but also having something positive to focus on. I would say the other closest thing to that is in my math class, our do now on every Friday is what is one good thing that happened from this week. So just lots of check-ins. As far as a program like what you suggested being put in place, I mean, the first thing that came to mind was that sounds very similar to a book club. And honestly, if there were like different topics to choose from, especially I think if they were student proposed, because students tend to like to listen to themselves. I think that could be,
Or student produced, right?
I mean, even student produced. Yeah, I know there was like a trial moth radio a couple years ago, like even if like that ever became a thing again. Or talking about like an article in the Register Forum or something that was published in the literary magazine. I think that could definitely be something that could bring people together. I think, yeah, I do think that like if it was done in a way that isn't necessarily forcing people to participate, it would be more effective. Just because I think when something is mandatory, sometimes it feels like there's like something that you have to fulfill, and I think that could add unnecessary stress. But I think if it's very much advertised, very much open, very very well done, honestly, if it's very well done, people are going to hear about it, it's going to have a ripple effect. And I think that's possible.
So I want to, for those who are watching this, we have a list of resources that I have been sending out through my office that may be on your screen now, I'm not sure. But if you are looking for resources in terms of, if you need a therapist, if you're looking for a therapist and you would prefer a therapist of color, I think, Roxanne, you've sent us a really good list. But we have a lot of resources that we've been sending out to try to meet different needs for different people. Please reach out to my office. We're going to include this podcast. And I think some of the takeaways, Maddie, that I just got from you are, one, you know, when students are able to actually have more autonomy and leadership and figuring out how to speak to each other and meet those needs, that is more effective. When it looks like it's something that is a polished product sometimes, like that it's finished and it excites other people, the more students see the interest around it, the more students are interested in this. And this, I do think about this for my own kids, the idea of really forcing us to each think about gratitude, right? I think for me, one of the strengths of my family is I grew up in public housing in Cambridge, and you know there wasn't always enough of what we needed. But one of the strengths of my family was that both of my parents were really clear that no matter how little we thought we always had a responsibility and we always had something to share, always. And that has been my mother her entire life. I've never seen a more generous person. And I used to think, if you want to know who the most generous people are in the world, it's those who have the least. And so I think that finding gratitude, it does a lot to center us in the world and remind us that we are still people of value. We still can see good in the world, even when we're experiencing pain, and we don't feel like we have enough. And I think that that's important to remember. Keith, I would love for you to just talk more about, you and I have talked, one, this idea that you talked about earlier, right? Different ways to, like, you know, integrate art into your family. Because I always think of like, oh my gosh, I'm not art oriented. I'm not a crafty person. And in our conversations, you've reminded me, like, it doesn't have to be that way. there's using art to engage young people and adolescents. And then there's also just like, having a dance party is art, right? I think about one of the things that I try to do as a parent is when moments feel really tense, how do I just shake it up? Like I have a repertoire like nobody's business of the most ridiculous voices and characters that might surprise people, because I'm not a particularly playful person or like comfortable being sort of silly. And but with my kids, I know that if I can break up that moment of tension, even if it's my own tension and I'm the cause of it because I just lost it. My daughter doesn't want to talk to me. I walk into that room and she's mad and I grab her foot and I say, okay, no problem, but I'm taking your foot with me, right? It sounds ridiculous. I'm like, no, this foot is coming with me now. And, it becomes this moment where it takes sometimes, a good 10 minutes to like still like get her to go along. And if she hears me talking about this, it's about how do you break up that tension, because we're all feeling tense. And so Keith, I want to go back to you because you and Roxanne have given some very concrete things, and we're going to be taking all of these takeaways. I actually have amazing staff who are also writing notes on all the stuff that we're saying, and we're going to be adding some of this to our resources. But, again, you're a parent, you're at home. What are some of the things that, parents can use to help break up the tension or to create joy or a memory? And Roxanne, if you can chime in at any point and where you think that this is also clinically informed of how we help build resiliency, because people will often say, and I'll stop talking after this, oh, children are resilient. And I want to be very clear. Children are resilient. They are as resilient as the tools that we also provide and help them build, right? We must meet the moment of this trauma with the same moment of tools to build resiliency. It's not always innate. And just because we survived trauma, it doesn't mean that it was all resiliency and that we weren't actually harmed in the process. And I think too often we think children are resilient. And we conflate that and confuse that with meaning that we don't have a responsibility to help them meet that moment and do, from a strength-based place, build additional tools to actually survive and navigate that moment.
Right. No, that's really well said. First, let me just say this, and this is more to high school students and things like that. And this is something that I push back on with high school students. First of all, Maddie, how come you're not in the August Wilson monologue competition class with me? I don't know why you're not, but you should be. So talk to Mr. Cramp and see how you can get it. So let me say that. Two, the other thing too is I push back on kids from Cambridge because I have to be honest. If we're really grateful about everything that we have or we don't have, then we realize there's certain things that we have a lot of in Cambridge, right? And so why is it not enough to create the space? Right? Why is that not enough? We're talking about building community and things like that. We have these spaces that are created a lot of times, but if they're not, so to speak, perfect or whatever, then sometimes people aren't gravitating to that, right? There's great resources that we have, right? However, it is a little difficult because sometimes we have to seek them out, right? But they are there. We have to be thankful for when there are spaces. And we have to take advantage of those spaces when they are created, right? That's the biggest thing right now is about creating space. How can educators create space within their classrooms to give voice to things, but not to the point where it's going to be overwhelming for them? Because like you said, they may not be equipped to be able to deal with the mental health issues, right? It's a tough thing right now, right? So I feel for all the educators and things like that. But here's what from working in Boston and then working with kids from Cambridge, here's what I said to kids from Cambridge. I don't want to see, as I tell the kids, I don't want to see in your house. I would like to see a nice blank wall if I can. However, you can leave your house as well, because you can find about 15 to 20 different places where you can have Wi-Fi. It's not like that in other places. That is a resource that sometimes we take for granted that we have here. Right? So it's a little bit different. So that's when I talk about us understanding our resources and what we have and being thankful for those things and using that to the best of our ability, right? To help ourselves, but also to help other folks. Now, in terms of, I love the voice, the changing of the voice thing, like that's amazing. And I do it all the time with Roxanne.
It's
To
not
try
welcomed.
what? To be able to change the mood, right? And sometimes as parents, we're taking ourselves a little bit, a little bit too serious. And I do it a lot of times with my goddaughter. Things get tense, right? And she'll give me the face, and I'll give the face right back. And sometimes that breaks, that sometimes can break the tension, right? The grabbing of the foot, I think, is really good. Some laughter in it. Because, yeah, things are serious, but sometimes you got to laugh. Sometimes you have to in those moments. I think other stuff is doing photo shoots. I think photo shoots are really fun sometimes, right? Photo shoots in the house, outside, you taking some selfies and things like that. I don't know about going on TikTok, but like that's just great TikTok. Like that's not dancing. Let me just make a comment. That's not dancing. That's not really dancing. Marjorie can tell you.
I can't even do that, but go ahead.
Look, Marjorie knows. If you want to go to a party back in the day at CRLS, you right, exactly. Marjorie was practicing in her mirror.
I was queen of the walk.
15 days straight before she did that. So TikTok, that's not dancing. Okay? But like I said, photo shoots are great. Those things are so easy to be able to do with your kids. Making a movie, a short movie, and a video and stuff. The phone there's so many things that you can do, right? And then also too, you figure out a project. You figure out a project to work together, or you just take, if you don't have a lot of time, then you just do quick things. Like I said.
So Roxanne and Keith, you have a child at home and you can't get them off the video game right now. I think many of us are experiencing that, right? You can't get them off a video game. And the only problem with that is that you begin to miss your kids. And you then also, they're getting, and I think with social media and, Maddie, I'd be interested to hear your take on this. I'll tell you as a parent, one of the things around sort of whether it's TikTok or YouTube or there's all these other ways that they communicate on video games, right? You start to become worried that there's this whole world that you know nothing about, that your kid is in this vortex of. Right. And some of that's just part of growing up, right? There's a lot. My mom didn't know I went to DC for a pro-choice rally overnight when I was 16, right? So, there's a lot that goes on with thought I was sleeping over someone's house in East Cambridge, and she's hearing that maybe the first time now, I don't know. Right. Hey, Mom. And so we do worry about that, right? Or your kid's just not talking to you right now. I think if you could, Roxanne, step in with those are it's one thing to say have a dance party, be playful, do videos, but when your kid is just really struggling and, as a parent, what's your advice right now? You're just trying to figure out, how do I connect with my child? Because sometimes that's the first step. You just need to know that they can still connect. And you want to be able to help sort of access some of that sadness that's behind some of that disconnect. What's your advice? And again, how do we, is there a way to sort of, again, bring arts into helping parents with those tools? Because it's not, even if you want to see a therapist, and even if you could find a therapist, which are both challenges, that doesn't mean that that's going to happen either. It doesn't mean that your young person's going to want to do that right away, right? So there's such a what's the word I'm looking for? That continuity. No, what's the word? There's so many spaces in which we are trying to figure out how to connect with our kids. Yeah, I just lost the word I was looking for. Clearly, go ahead, Roxanne.
I think that when I was thinking about this, I was thinking a little bit about the difficult thing is for a parent to see their child in suffering, pain, or worrying, or feeling anxious. And so what we're learning right now, what we've always known, but it's sort of smacking us in the face right now, is that those are appropriate feelings for the situation. And what parents want to do, and they're right about wanting to do this, is to remove it from their children. That's not helpful because it's not realistic. We can't, right? I walk around, especially so it's been a good thing and a bad thing that I am still in person going to the hospital and working. I often walk around with this idea in my mind, and I think a lot of my students talk about this with me. Coronavirus, we know, is a huge danger, right? It actually feels like it's lurking in every corner, and you have no idea when it's going to get you. That's how I walk around. That helps me be more concerned, anxious, maybe a little hypervigilant. But those emotions also keep me safe in the world. So if a parent wants to remove the worry and the anxiety from their kids, then you're also removing how they naturally keep themselves safe. The natural systems of our body, of our minds. So it's not helpful to remove. It's helpful to create, to help your kids understand it's normal to feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk about why it's normal and it's okay. When you start creating that space and you tell them it's okay to not be feeling mentally well, or you start expressing to them, because sometimes depending on my students, I have to find space with them. And I have to be able to say, the story that I said, I've said that to some of my students. I walk around feeling like it's going to get me. And my students, I don't know what Cambridge Latin students are doing, but they're calling it Miss Rona. This is why I love young people. Because they'll take something and they'll make it fun. They're like, yeah, Miss Rona. And I'm like, who? And they're like, Miss Corona Rona. And I'm like, oh, I got you, right? But even though there were
You're on mute. Somehow. Okay, go ahead.
Even though they're talking about it that way, I'm not trying to remove the worry. I'm trying to redirect them to, here's the things, and Maddie talked about this earlier. Here are the things you cannot control, and here are the things you can control. And Maddie was talking about, instead of talking about the bad things, let's talk about the good things. And that's another very effective tool for your children. We can write down what we can't control and what we can control. All right, let's focus on what we can control because that always feels good. Right, it feels good. This is what I can do. I can go wash my hands. I can wear a mask. I can distance. I can stay home. I can be deliberate when I go out. Right? So that's how you sort of pull adults and young people in to that middle ground of let's focus on what we can do and then create a plan so that when they do feel that anxiety, they're practicing how to cope. That's what we want. That's mental wellness. When you practice how to cope with whatever's happening for you. There's no removing. It becomes more anxiety provoking to say, I'm just going to take those feelings away from you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, Maddie, I'd be curious to hear your feedback. I think as a parent, we constantly, and maybe this is not, I should stop saying we. I can say for me and some parents, I think that it's about trying to quickly protect our kids from feeling any pain, right? And in that process of trying to protect them from pain, I'm denying them the opportunity to actually feel the pain and to then share that they're having the pain, right? So the last thing I want them to do is to not share that they're in pain because they know that I'm going to immediately try to just remove it, which means that I'm not really listening. And, and the same way that I tell my husband that every time I complain, I'm not looking for him to solve my problem. I just need to complain. That I think that, it's the same thing for almost anybody and for young people. You want to be able to share with your parents because just in the process of sharing, I know for me, sharing can be also like a place that just, it allows me to feel safer. And I had a ton of anxiety. I don't talk about this a lot publicly. As a young high school student, I definitely had anxiety that went undiagnosed. And then as a young person on the city council, I was 25 when I ran for city council. And I walked around feeling so anxious because I felt this weight of responsibility that I was supposed to somehow immediately be able to alleviate the pain of so many people I've grown up with who mirror the pain of my own childhood, from what it means to not have enough of what you need, right? And we live in a culture that says that if you don't have enough of what you need, that somehow that is individually your problem and your shortcoming, right? And what I say to people today is like, there's no way that 1 in 8 people in Cambridge who are experiencing hunger can somehow, that is individually their problem, right? So when we live in a society where people are not able to meet the needs of themselves or their children or their families, whether that's through the emotional needs or their physical needs, their economic needs, that is not a failure of an individual. It's a failure of a society. But I walked around feeling really anxious. And it wasn't until I actually talked to a social worker who happened to be working on a campaign with me who said, this is anxiety. So I never even knew what a panic attack was, never even knew. And it took somebody just saying that to me. And the next thing that they said was, you don't always have to feel this way. And I had spent most of my teens and my 20s coping with anxiety privately, because thinking that was also a shortcoming of me and being too afraid to share that, because I thought if I shared it, then people would think I was not actually good enough to be an elected official. And the truth is, when we carry the weight of our families and our communities and now a pandemic, the appropriate healthy response is to feel anxious because it's overwhelming. And we should be anxious. And I guess I would just love to hear from your perspective as a young person. At least you can speak for yourself, if any of this like resonates to you and what your response is to this.
Yeah, of course. Literally had like so many thoughts going through my head. I think the first thing that I'll like start off with is when I say this, I'm not saying like only adults do this. I think pretty much everybody tries to do this. I think there's this idea that when something seems not happy, bubbly, optimistic, positive, there's a need to fix it. And I think that that's not always the answer. Now, if someone is hungry, yeah, we should try to fix that so that they can eat food. But in terms of like emotional and like mental well-being, I think it's really important to just like know that when someone comes to you for help, you don't have to have an answer, and like that's okay. Which is basically like reiterating what you all have said already, but it really is true. You don't have to have an answer, and a lot of times something I've started doing is when my friends come to me and are like, hey, these are all the things that are stressing me out, sorry, I shouldn't have ranted, and then they like go on a little spiel about like, oh, I'm such a terrible person, I didn't even ask you if I could rant to you and things like that. I'm just like, no, dude, you're valid, all your feelings are valid. Like, you don't have to apologize to me for feeling how you feel. You don't have to apologize to anybody for feeling how you feel, because how you feel is real to you. And like, no one can tell you that you can't feel that way because they're not you. They don't know what you're going through. As much as you may tell someone what you're going through, they're truly never going to know what you're going through. Just because typically, even if we think we've said everything, there's typically still more. And so I think it's just a matter of like being there for people and like saying like everything you're feeling is okay. And if it is like a list of things like, oh, there are all these things that I have to do, something that has helped me that I was actually helping one of my friends with this the other day is like making a list, because once I make a list, I can see it all and it doesn't feel as big in my head. And then I know that some people disagree with this, but doing the easiest thing first, because then you already have one thing off the list. Like some people are like, oh, do the hardest thing first. I like to do the easiest thing first, because then I'm like, oh, that's one thing off my list. One of my friends showed me this one time, and it was, have your first thing on your checklist be make a checklist, so that you can automatically just check something off. That feeling of checking something off, even if it's I made a checklist, so much better. The wonders of the brain. Yeah, so I think just like being able to take a step back and just talking through everything with someone. And if you want an answer, saying, but for the most part, just saying like how you're feeling is okay. Honestly,
I think we just lost you, Maddie, the volume.
can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Where did you lose me at?
You said make a list if you want to talk to someone.
Okay, yeah. If you want to talk to someone and like you do want an answer, you can say, "Do you have any advice for me?" And sometimes offering advice is helpful even when someone hasn't asked for it. Like there's no right or wrong answer, but for the most part, just saying like whatever you're going through, that's totally okay. Like it's okay to feel like that. And you should feel free to feel that way. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling that way. And your feelings are valid. Like I think something as simple as telling someone your feelings are valid, regardless of whether they ask you for advice or not, regardless of whether you want to give them advice or not, is going to just go so far in making them feel like there's not actually something wrong with me, because we have feelings for a reason. So it's okay to feel those feelings. In terms of like connecting to students and like the whole video games thing, my friends will be the first to tell you I am the worst at video games. But when I've noticed that something that my parents do, especially my dad, does when they notice that I'm not feeling great, is they'll say, "Do you want to play a game?" And we'll like play some board games. Recently he started teaching me chess because I've been obsessed with Queen's Gambit. So like, I think it's like finding things that are that like you talk about with your parents, and then like trying to find a connection maybe through that, and not even just like the parents finding something to do with the children. Like if the kids want to connect with their parents and they're like, I don't know how to do that, like and like your parent likes to read a book or something, you could say like, "Hey, do you want to like proofread my paper?" or something, like something that just gets people doing things together. Because I think one thing right now is that everyone feels so isolated, and even in like, even if you are overhoused or if you do have like family members living with you, like it can still feel isolating. I know like I have a sister and both my parents live with me, and like sometimes I still feel lonely even though like we're in the same room. And that's okay. So I think like trying to find ways to connect with the people that you can connect with is really important. It's not and it's not just about what can they do for me, but also what can you do for them, and then like trying to find that middle ground so that you're both doing things for each other and you're connecting in ways that's more than just, oh, what are my interests? And sometimes it might start off with, let's focus on this person's interests, and just do that for a while, and it's fun because you're doing things together. But I think ultimately when you try to connect with people from both sides, it does really go far. Yeah, so that's what I have to say on
What
that.
you're talking about, Maddie, is asking for what you need. And that's something that we don't do that. We don't say, this is what I need, or this is what I want. And when we can get to that place to just simply say that, then that helps other people navigate you and be able to communicate to you, this is, like, this is what I can do. Is that all right? Or I can't do it right now. And then at least we're practicing that effective communication. This is what I need. I need a hug right now. Don't talk to me. I just need a hug.
Yeah, no, I've done
So we have just about 6 minutes left here, which I feel like I could now, we're really just getting into this. Now we could like spend another hour. But a couple of things I want to remind people. If you're looking for resources, if you go to my website, Decker with the number 4rep.com, there's a list of resources. If you are really seeing that your child is in real crisis and you're worried about like needing immediate help, I want to be clear, many people do not feel comfortable and do not think it's a safe option always to call 911, but sometimes will do that because it may with having such a mental health crisis, they don't know who else to call. If you go on my website, there's also these incredible mobile crisis teams where they will send somebody to your home who is a trained professional mental health, behavioral health specialist. So, if you don't know about mobile crisis teams, please go on my website to learn more about that. I also want to say that if you're on Instagram, whether you're a parent or an adult or anybody, one of the best Instagram that I follow is CRLS Mental Health, which I believe is curated by CRLS students. And it is powerful. They I've listened to CRLS students present a report of what they thought the school should be doing around mental health advocacy and support. And I thought, scrap whatever it is that we think we should be doing, take their work and just do it. And we will be 90% there. And that goes back to, many, I think, young people really understanding the best of what they need and needing us to listen. But CRLS Mental Health, follow it. It's amazing. And then with that, I think the only other thing I wanted to make sure I said here is, I will just say that for parents, I'll add my last kind of the thing that I have tried to do in my family is I call it COVID parenting 2020. And with each of my kids, I have found an extraordinarily inappropriate show to watch for their age. And so my son and I are almost done with The Office. And it was like, he was aghast at how inappropriate this was. And it is so ridiculous. And it has been just fun. And educational, quite frankly, because we talk about the inappropriate stuff that's happening there. But it's been a very easy way to just stay connected. So we're almost done, but it's been an amazing journey to do that. And then the whole family has been sucked into Jane the Virgin, which is wildly inappropriate for a 9-year-old. And boy, have we had the best health education going on in our family by watching this together. And we're all watching it together. Brilliant writing, never knew about it until now. So I think that we're all doing the best we can and trying to find things that help us to ultimately just be connected to each other, whether it's our own family or our friends. And, Keith, I'm going to ask you if you would just we've got 3 minutes here, but in the last 3 minutes, there's a lot happening for young people, and you're seeing it on the ground through the work that you're doing. We haven't even started touching, we've just barely touched the surface of, there's been a pandemic. There's been racial unrest and an incredible demand by young people and people of color for people to respond far more appropriately to getting to the roots of white supremacy and racism and violence that disproportionately impacts people of color. The pandemic has disproportionately impacted people of color, and we haven't even gotten into as we are all suffering, the level of suffering has not been equal. And I know that you have been really playing a really critical role with young people and helping to access this kind of space and create this space, particularly with young men of color, but a lot of students. And in fact, I know that you're going to be at some point taking this curated show, to other states. You've already been asked to bring it to because it's been successful. But if you could just leave us with some of your parting wisdom about really, how to continue trying to show up and be our best selves in supporting each other, supporting young people, and understanding how to integrate arts. You've got 2 minutes. Just go ahead.
Yeah, no,
give the rest of it to us.
That's more than enough time. First of all, let me just give a shout out to Maddie because you're awesome. Let me just say that first and foremost. I think listening is important. I think creating space is important for people to be honest. Building community is about listening. I think that's a big deal. But the thing about creating space. So I did I worked with the Boys and Men program this summer, with Ty Dorch and the rest of the fellas, and, really help these young men create monologues talking about mental health and manhood and resiliency and what it's like to be black and brown right now. And it was incredible with how much they shared. And we had just such an incredible opportunity. Big shout out to the folks over at Starlight. And we were able to perform these monologues and call some of my acting friends to come out and read them because the voices needed to be heard in a different way. And it was just amazing. It was amazing just to feel honored to create space for folks in the city that I grew up in. but I was even more humbled that they trusted me enough to be able to share everything that they did. And now we have the opportunity to take it to Portland, Oregon, along with my one-man show called Triggered Life, which talks about my story about being a survivor and looking towards the future and things like that. So I'm excited to be able to do that. I'm excited to be able to take 10 kids from all over Portland and have them talk about those same issues that they haven't talked about, and then be able to take part of that and write it on a custom pair of the Triggered Project shoes is amazing. So really excited about that. I will give a quick plug to listen to Roxanne and I. We have a podcast called Living a Triggered Life, where we're talking about what it's like to be in a marriage and have trauma history. And so it's pretty groundbreaking so I've been told. We're on all platforms. Please check us out. But let's listen to each other. Let's try to have more fun. As adults, let's try to be kids a little bit more with our kids. Let's not put as much pressure on ourselves as we do. Let's have more dance parties. Let's watch things together. Let's play video games together. Let's use that phone for the photo shoots and to create memories. Let's create new memories that are great during this time, right? How can we create a positive time capsule for what was going well during this time? How can we do that? How can we use art to be able to do that? So children and parents can look back at this time and like, wow, this was really terrible. However, this is what we've been able to do together. And I challenge everybody. How can we become better? How can we help each other more during this time? How can we change ourselves for the better? But how can we help change others for the better during this time using all the gifts that we have? Let's not limit ourselves with what we can do or what we can't do. Let's be thankful for what we have to work with, and let's be the best at that.
Roxanne and Keith, I want to thank you for all of your incredible work. Please do catch the Triggered podcast. It is awesome. It delivers. And thank you for your honesty in that podcast and for the work that you do. Maddie, I think like this alone today, you have the makings of your own podcast. You are dropping a lot of truths and a lot of really very specific, helpful like things for people to actually do, both for parents and for young people. And I'm excited to continue following you as well to see where you, where this leadership and this wisdom that you seem to already have within you takes you. I hope that you and Keith will connect, and I can make that happen offline as well. And you know, to all of you, and to Sofia who joined us earlier. I just want to say thank you for joining us. Thank you to everybody who's been watching this. You can watch this on CCTV. You can watch this on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV. We've been on Facebook Live and through a Zoom. And to say that, you know, it's an incredible privilege to serve as your state representative and a public servant to our community. And our community and my work is only as strong as the community that I represent and the people that I work with. And so I'm honored. And, you know, I just say that we are almost there, right? Light is at the end of the tunnel. And again, we didn't even know that there was a tunnel to like crawl through several months ago. We are almost there. Keep safe. This virus is looking to snatch you, but it really is. I mean, I'm staying out of stores right now because I'm hearing about more and more cases from people who thought they were being careful. And that's because the numbers are up so high. For those who have to leave their house, the best thing we can do is to, you know, work through our boredom at home and go for a walk as opposed to going into the store if you don't have to, because there are people who don't have a choice. At the same time, we're not helpless. We really do. For those who have the benefit of not having to go into work right now, as Roxanne said, we are not completely helpless either. So I do feel like that metaphor you and I talked about earlier was that it's lurking. It's like waiting. Is it waiting to get me? It creates a lot of anxiety. At the same time, we're not helpless. There's things that we can do to the best of our abilities. And I think that that's empowering. And I think this conversation is going to continue because we need to reimagine what recovering looks like in a pandemic, and one that really centers those who were impacted the greatest. Why? And you know, what a just recovery means is going to be something that we have the opportunity that I think could potentially make us actually a better community and a better society than what we think we just had taken away from us. So I want to thank you guys, and thank you CCTV, and to Susan Fleischman. This may be your very last town hall with me. I don't even remember how many years. It's been a lot. Your dedication and your love and believing in CCTV and the believing in the ability to give voice to everyday people has been, I think, profound. And you've built an incredible a groundwork here that I think legacy sounds like such a dour word, but you have built like an incredible tool for our community to really continue to be connected and strengthen each other. So thank you for the gifts that you have given us over the decades, and to all the staff at CCTV, thank you for the work to do. And there's so much more to do together. Be well, everybody.